I've been reflecting on my safety track record here at Berm Peak. Sometimes I get a bad rap for workshop safety practices, and I don't think it's deserved, honestly. I still have all my fingers. Nobody's ever had to go directly from this workshop to a hospital, and there's just people that are way worse. So maybe I'm not the right person to be giving you safety advice in the shop, but I can show you a whole bunch of different ways that you can get hurt working on your mountain bike. And you could consider not doing those things. Let's start with low-hanging fruit. Your disc brake rotors can mess up your hands in so many different ways. And in fact, I tried to make a ballistic, like gelatin hand to demonstrate some of these things. Didn't work out, and so that's why I'm using a hot dog today. So obviously, you spin your wheel and you stick your fingy in here. It's not good. Maybe that won't happen to your finger, but it depends on how fast the wheel is spinning. This is obviously a concern. And you might say, well, this is simple to avoid. Just don't put your finger in the rotor when the wheel is spinning, but that's not how it happens. Nobody's just losing control and sticking their finger in their rotor. The way that I've gotten into trouble is truing a rotor while it's on the bike. Sometimes your rotor hits into something, it's a little bent out of shape, and so you're spinning it back and forth and your fingers are near it, and don't put your fingers near it. But this can also happen if you're doing kind of a manual adjustment on the position of your caliper. You're spinning the wheel back and forth and moving the caliper. It's really easy to get just the tip of your finger over here. And these brake rotors are like the safest ones you're ever gonna see. You have this big fat spline over here. A rotor like this is sharp at every single point on it. It's gonna do way more damage to you at barely any speed. I've lost like little chunks off the tip of my finger in the early days. I would just caution you to really keep your fingies far from the disc rotor. So maybe you have a bolt-on rotor with T25s. They're very shallow, and if you're not careful or you're not using the best tool, the wrench tends to be able to slip out of them, and you can graze your knuckle on the edge of your disc rotor. And whether you graze the spline in the middle or the rotor on the outside, it's very, very sharp, and if your knuckle hits it, you're gonna be bleeding all over the place and you're gonna have a bad time, and so just choose the right tool when you're doing this. And so usually you'll see me using one of these three-way tools to work on rotors because it positions your hand really far away from it, makes it almost impossible for you to hurt your hand using one of these. So especially if you're used to just riding your bike, you would never regard your bike frame as dangerous, but let's say you're setting the sag in your rear shock. I've seen people kind of hold the bike like this because they just put it on the ground and then hop onto it. Now, with certain linkage, you wouldn't have to worry about anything, but as the bike compresses, this shock is moving up and it can totally crush your knuckles right here. When it's really gonna catch you by surprise is when your shock is out and you're just handling your bike frame. So if you're like me, from time to time, you do a full rebuild on your full suspension bike. You break it down, you clean all the parts, you put it back together, runs like new. But when the shock is out, oh man, are there ways you can crush your fingies. I've had my hand resting on the bike in a weird position when I've actually pulled the shock and the weight of the rear wheel pulls the linkage down and just massacred my fingers. Now, when you take a bike frame off of the stand, it gets way more dangerous because now you can put it in any position. So I have my hand like this and everything seems dandy. If I turn the bike upside down because I'm cleaning it, now this thing's gonna come down and crush my hand. And this is one of those things that you really don't think about until your hand's being crushed. So here I have my dirt jump bike. Now, I don't ride this as much as my full suspension bikes, and so when I'm working on it, sometimes I forget that it's different. Like, for example, there's no slack on the chain whatsoever. It's always tight. And so if you have your finger here while you're backpedaling or even close to it, there's no spring over there to save you. Bad things are gonna happen. At what point do we call in Oscar to help clean up? So when I was a kid, I didn't have a bike this nice, but I did have a bike and I did work on it just like this. Upside down, you can cycle the drivetrain, you can get to everything. Good way to work on your bike. And because I was a BMXer, I was always changing out pedals, which were insanely tight. Now, here, you can see this chain is on the chain ring over here. If you are working on pedals, I would highly recommend you leave the chain on, because here, if my hand hits it, it actually doesn't hurt at all. Now, what happens if we take the chain off? Now this is totally exposed. If your hand hits into it, you're gonna get really, really hurt. So you have these really tight pedals that you put on with no grease, and you're just putting all your might down on the pedal wrench. Finally, it cracks loose, and what happens? Your hand goes straight into the chain ring. Now, there are positions you can put the wrench in that are much safer than that, but if you put the chain on, it's just an extra layer of protection for when things don't go well. Are you noticing a pattern here? Hands and fingies. And so you guys know I take pride in my collection of multicolor cable crimps. I put these on every bike, partially because it keeps the cable from getting frayed, and it's safer. When your cable is frayed like this, you have all these little guys sticking out, just getting ready to poke you. And if you think that's a long shot, well, then one day you're gonna get poked with it and you're gonna see why. And so cable crimps are not only attractive, but they're safe. So this next one gets talked about all the time. Before you work on an air fork or an air shock, you should probably let the air out of it. And public service announcement, you should let the air out with a suspension pump, not with a pick. And that part actually has nothing to do with safety. So of course, this is a Schrader valve right here. You can just depress it and it's gonna let all the air out. But the reason you should let the air out with a shock pump is that if you just press the valve down, it does it really fast. It could suck some grease into a port, probably gonna be fine, but yeah, if you wanna play it safe, and that's what this video is about, use a shock pump. But I think the most important point is, let the air out, because I'm about to show you what happens if you don't. Man, this is so wrong. Nothing happened. So, truth be told, I've never blown the cap off of a fork, and so I didn't know that it gently lets the air out before it ever gets to that point. Now, maybe I was lucky, but it makes sense. You get up to the last few threads, this little rubber ring isn't there, air starts going shh, and you kind of notice. You'd really have to be taking it off fast, I think, to get hit in the face with one of these. But back in the day when these were plastic, you go off a big drop, hit the ground, and it would just fly up in the air and hit you in the face. I guess take your fork and shock apart with it totally inflated, it doesn't matter. Don't do that. Those of you who have been watching for a while know that I blew a tubeless tire off the bead right here in the shop while inflating it. Not only did my entire face get covered with sealant and it got all over the ceiling, but my hand was on the tire and it got hurt so bad I couldn't ride for like a week after that. It really hurt, and we did a demonstration video just showing what it's like when you blow a tire off the bead. And so when you're seating tubeless tires, just never ever go above 40 PSI. It's just not worth it. I was not keeping an eye on the gauge that day. But there are other honorable mentions. We don't have any e-bikes here today, but you should really take the battery out of those things when you're working on them. Depending on what type of e-bike you're working on, you could just touch the crank and the entire drivetrain is gonna start spinning, and so you should really disable the battery. There are other safety precautions in the shop, like wearing gloves. Now, as you can see by this box, I do use gloves, but sometimes I don't when I should, especially when working with .5 brake fluid. Are you gonna die from touching it? No, but it can irritate your skin, and if you have an open cut or something, it's probably not good for it. So yeah, we could crank up the safety another few notches here if we really wanted to, but the fact that I have a little bit of experience being unsafe means I can share these things with you. Now, we left out a lot of things today, but these are precautions that I would take based on my own experience. I want to hear from you guys. What's the worst you've ever gotten hurt working on your bike? Or what's a precaution that you should take? I hope you guys had fun today talking about safety in the workshop. I know those hot dogs could have fed starving children, but those particular hot dogs, I don't even think starving children would eat. And so I hope at least some of you learned something today, and if not, I hope you were at least entertained. Thanks for riding with me today, and I'll see you next time.